You knew this was coming, Nathan.
Emily, please.
I don't know how much longer I can keep this going.
We'll find a way, Nathan. I know you will. You promised you would protect us, Nathan. Don't fail her again.
You know this is what has to happen, Emily.
There's nowhere for us to go now. Sign the papers, dear.
Mrs. Hawthorne, I apologize for the interruption, but I have some urgent documents.
Come in, Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you. If you could just sign here.
The first thing my mother-in-law said when I walked into the charity gala was, "Did the staff entrance close early tonight?" For one breath, nobody moved. Then the laughter rose beneath the crystal chandelier, like champagne bubbles in a glass. I stood in the doorway of Hawthorne Manor with rain still shining on the shoulders of my old navy dress, the same dress my mother had worn to church every Christmas before she passed. I had hemmed it myself the night before with a needle, blue thread, and hands that would not stop trembling. Under the golden lights, I could see every weakness in the fabric. The faded cuffs, the tiny repair near the waist, the place where the color had softened from years of careful washing. Margaret Hawthorne saw all of it too. She wanted everyone else to see it. "Emily," she said, smiling as if kindness were a performance she had never practiced. "I thought Nathan told you this was formal." A woman near the fireplace covered her mouth. Another guest looked away, but not quickly enough. My husband stood beside his mother in a black tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Nathan looked at me, then at the room, then at the floor. That was how he hurt me most. Not with cruelty, with silence. Madison Blake stood near him in a pearl-white gown that moved like water when she turned. She had arrived 10 minutes before me, I was sure, because Margaret had already placed her close to Nathan, close enough for people to notice, close enough for me to understand. "Poor thing," Madison said softly, though her voice carried across the marble foyer. Someone should have helped her choose something appropriate. My fingers curled around the small beaded purse I had borrowed from a neighbor. I could feel the worn clasp pressing into my palm. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows. Inside, the room smelled like roses, expensive perfume, and roasted beef from the dining room. Hawthorne Manor had never looked more beautiful, or less like home. 3 years of marriage had taught me how to disappear inside that house. I knew which stairs creaked at midnight. I knew which window in the West Hall leaked during storms. I knew how Charles Hawthorne liked his tea when the pain kept him awake, and which old songs made his tired eyes soften before he died. I knew more about that mansion than anyone laughing at me. But to them, I was still the woman Nathan had married too quickly. The woman with no famous last name, no father in politics, no trust fund, no country club smile. Margaret stepped closer and touched the sleeve of my dress between 2 fingers, as if the fabric might stain her. "This is what you chose to wear while standing among donors, judges, and board members," she asked. "This is a Hawthorne event." I looked past her at Nathan. Just once. I waited for him to say my name like I belonged there. He swallowed. His jaw tightened. Then he whispered, "Emily, please don't make this worse." Something cold moved through me then. It was not anger. Anger would have been louder. This was quieter, cleaner, like a door closing somewhere deep inside my chest. Margaret turned back to the guests and laughed. "Well," she said, raising her glass, "every family has its little embarrassments." More laughter followed. I lowered my eyes to the navy dress and smoothed the front with both hands. My mother had worn this dress when she had nothing but dignity. I had worn it because I wanted one person in that room to remember who I was before the Hawthorns taught me to be small. But as I looked at Nathan standing beside Madison, I realized the dress was not the real reason they were laughing. They were laughing because they thought I had no power to answer. They were laughing because they believed this house belonged to them. And that night, beneath the chandelier, while rain slid down the windows like quiet warnings, I understood something they did not. Before the evening ended, every person in that room would remember exactly where they were standing when they learned whose name was on the deed. I had learned long before that a mansion could feel smaller than a one-bedroom apartment if nobody inside it wanted you there. Hawthorne Manor had 12 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, 2 formal dining rooms, a library with a rolling ladder, and a garden that stretched almost an acre behind the stone terrace. Guests saw the polished floors and the tall windows and thought wealth made every room warm. I knew better. I knew the way silence gathered in the corners after Margaret left a room. I knew the exact sound of Nathan closing his study door when he did not want to answer me. I knew how cold the marble felt under bare feet at 4 in the morning when Charles Hawthorne called my name from the room at the end of the East Hall. For 3 years, that house had been my duty, not my home. I woke before the staff because Charles hated feeling helpless in front of strangers. I brought his tea with 1 spoon of honey, never 2. I learned which pills made him nauseous, which blankets were too heavy, which old records helped him sleep when pain made the night long. Margaret called it obligation. Nathan called it kindness. Charles called it loyalty. He was the only one who ever looked at me as if I was not an accident his son had brought home. During the day, I smiled at women who asked where I had gone to college, then stopped listening when my answer was not impressive enough. I helped organize charity lunches where Margaret introduced me as Nathan's wife with the same tone she used for damaged furniture. I wrote thank you notes, scheduled appointments, paid vendors when Margaret forgot, and quietly handled problems nobody wanted to admit existed. The West Hall window leaked every spring. The downstairs powder room had a pipe that groaned before it burst. The gardener had not been paid for 6 weeks once, and I covered it from my own savings because he had a child starting kindergarten. Nobody noticed. Or maybe they noticed and decided silence was cheaper than gratitude. The first time I saw the foreclosure notice, it was tucked under a silver tray in Charles's room. Margaret had left it there by mistake, face down, as if paper could hide shame. I did not touch it at first. I only saw the red stamp through the thin envelope and felt the air leave my lungs. Later that evening, Charles asked me to close the door. His hands shook when he reached for the folder beside his bed. They think a name can hold a house together, he said. It cannot. I wanted to tell Nathan. I wanted to believe my husband would stand up, take responsibility, and protect what generations had built. But Charles looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "Not yet, Emily. They will blame you before they admit the truth." He was right. They always blamed the easiest person, the quiet one, the one with no powerful parents at the dinner table, the one who kept fixing what they broke. A month later, I sold the small brick house my mother had left me in Ohio. It had 2 bedrooms, peeling white shutters, and a maple tree in the front yard that turned gold every October. It was the last place where I had belonged without proving anything. I signed the sale papers with a pen that felt too heavy. Then I wired the money to save a mansion where my own name was never spoken with respect. Charles cried when I told him. I had never seen an old man apologize with his whole face before. 2 weeks before he died, he pressed a thick cream envelope into my hands. His signature was across the seal. "When they show you who they are," he said, "let the papers speak." I hid that envelope in the bottom drawer of my nightstand beneath winter gloves and old birthday cards. I never opened it in anger. I never used it to win an argument. Even on the night of the gala, even with laughter still burning my skin, I thought about leaving it there. Then Nathan looked at me like I was the stain on his perfect evening, and I finally understood. The papers had waited longer than I should have. Nathan had not always been a man who looked away. That was the hardest part to forgive. When I first met him at a small fundraiser in Cleveland, he had spilled coffee on his cuff and laughed like it did not matter. He had asked me about my mother's garden before he asked what I did for a living. He had driven 3 hours through a snowstorm once because I told him I hated eating dinner alone on the anniversary of her passing. Back then, I believed gentleness was the same thing as strength. I learned later that some men could be kind in private and cowardly in public. Nathan loved me best when nobody important was watching. In the beginning, he held my hand in grocery store, parking lots, and kissed my forehead while we waited at red lights. He said Hawthorne Manor was too cold, too perfect, too full of people pretending. He said I made him feel human. Then we moved into that house after Charles became sick, and slowly, room by room, Nathan changed back into the son Margaret had raised him to be. He stopped calling the mansion cold. He started calling it legacy. He stopped laughing at the rules. He started obeying them. The first time Margaret corrected my dress at dinner, Nathan squeezed my knee under the table but said nothing. The first time she told a guest I came from a family with modest expectations, Nathan changed the subject instead of defending me. The first time she asked whether I had learned which fork to use, he smiled at me afterward and said, "She is just old-fashioned." Cruelty is easier to survive when the person beside you names it honestly. Nathan kept giving it softer names until I wondered if I was the only one hearing it. After Charles died, whatever courage my husband had left seemed to be buried with him. Margaret took over the household again. She decided who sat where, who received invitations, which charities carried the Hawthorne name, and which conversations ended when I walked into the room. Nathan began spending long evenings at the company office, though the office called less often than he claimed. His shirts smelled like cedar, expensive soap, and sometimes a perfume I did not own. I never searched his pockets. I never followed him. I only watched the way his phone turned face down when I entered the room. Then Madison Blake returned from Palm Beach with bright hair, white dresses, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if she belonged. She had known Nathan since boarding school. Margaret adored that detail. She repeated it at brunch, at dinner, at every gathering where my own history was treated like an unfortunate gap in conversation. Madison knew how to touch his sleeve while pretending not to. She knew how to laugh at his jokes a second too long. She knew how to look at me with pity polished so smooth it almost looked like grace. The night of the gala, before I walked into the foyer, I found Nathan in the library with her. Nothing improper was happening. That almost made it worse. They were simply standing close beside Charles's old desk, looking over the donor list together as if they were already a pair. Madison held a silver pen. Nathan held the corner of the paper. Their shoulders nearly touched. When he saw me in the doorway, his eyes went straight to my dress. Not my face. Not my wet hair. Not the nervous way I was holding my purse. The dress. His expression tightened before he could hide it. Madison looked me over and gave a small, careful smile. "Oh, Emily," she said. "You are brave." I knew what she meant. Nathan set the donor list down and crossed the room toward me. For one foolish second, I thought he might say I looked beautiful because he remembered what that dress meant. Instead, he lowered his voice and said, "Please do not embarrass me tonight." The words were quiet, but they landed harder than Margaret's laughter ever could. I looked at the man I had sold my mother's house to protect, and I saw clearly that he was not afraid of losing me. He was afraid of being seen with me. Margaret did not need to raise her voice to make a room obey her. She only had to lift her glass and smile in that careful way of hers, the way that made people lean closer because they expected something polished, expensive, and cruel. "Everyone," she said, standing beneath the chandelier as the string quartet softened near the dining room doors. "Before we begin the auction, I want to thank you for supporting the Hawthorne Children's Foundation. Charles believed this house should always open its doors to people in need." Her eyes moved to me on the last 3 words. A few guests followed her gaze. I stood near the edge of the foyer, still holding my purse with both hands, still feeling the rain cooling on the back of my neck. Nathan stood 10 feet away beside Madison, close enough to help me, far enough to pretend he had no reason to. Margaret continued, "Of course, opening one's doors does not mean lowering one's standards." A small laugh slipped through the room. Madison lowered her lashes as if the comment embarrassed her, but the corner of her mouth lifted. I had seen that look before. It was the look of a woman enjoying a wound she did not have to admit she made. "Emily," Margaret said, turning fully toward me, "would you mind standing near the refreshment table for the photographs? The donors will be gathering by the fireplace, and I would hate for anyone to feel confused." The room went quiet in the way polite rooms do when cruelty wears gloves. Nobody gasped. Nobody objected. They only watched. My face warmed, but I did not move. The refreshment table was where the servers placed folded napkins and trays of sparkling water. Margaret knew exactly what she was asking. She wanted me out of the family picture without having to say the words. An older man near the piano cleared his throat. I recognized him as Judge Wallace, one of Charles's oldest friends. He looked at me for a long second, and I thought he might speak. But Margaret stepped smoothly into the silence. "Emily has always been more comfortable helping behind the scenes," she said. "Is that not right, dear?" Nathan adjusted his cufflinks. I watched his fingers because I could not bear to watch his face. Madison drifted closer to me, carrying a crystal glass with a slice of lime floating at the top. "I have a dress in my car," she said softly. "A simple black one. It might be a little long on you, but it would be better for photographs." Her voice sounded gentle. Her eyes did not. "That is kind," I said. My voice surprised me. It came out calm. Too calm. "But I am wearing my mother's dress." For one moment, Something human flickered across Madison's face. Then Margaret laughed. How sentimental. Unfortunately, sentiment is not a dress code. More laughter. Softer this time, but worse because everyone understood the joke and chose to survive it by joining. A woman in diamonds whispered to her husband. A young board member looked down at his shoes. The photographer shifted his camera from one hand to the other, uncomfortable but obedient. Margaret stepped beside Nathan and touched his shoulder as if presenting the son she still owned. A Hawthorne must understand presentation, she said. Our family name carries history, responsibility, taste. She looked back at me. Some people marry into a name and never learn how to carry it. That was the sentence that finally changed the air inside me. Not because it was the cruelest thing she had ever said. It was not. But because Nathan heard it clearly. Everyone heard it clearly. And still my husband said nothing. I placed my glass of water on the nearest table. Carefully. No sound. No spill. My hands were steady now. The rain tapped the windows behind me, patient and steady, like it had been counting down all evening. I looked at Margaret, then at Madison, then at Nathan. I hope everyone remembers exactly what was said tonight, I told them. Margaret smiled as if I had amused her. Nathan's face tightened. Madison tilted her head, confused for the first time. Nobody in that room understood why I was not crying. Nobody understood that the old dress they mocked had pockets deep enough to hold a key, a folded note, and the number of the one man who knew the truth about that house. Nathan reached me before Margaret could answer. His hand closed around my elbow, not hard, but firm enough to remind me that he still believed a husband had the right to move his wife out of sight when she became inconvenient. Come with me, he said under his breath. I looked at his fingers on my sleeve, then at his face. He let go before anyone noticed. Or maybe everyone noticed and pretended not to. That was the language of Hawthorne Manor. Cruel things were allowed as long as they were done quietly. He led me down the West Hall, past the portraits of men with silver hair and women with pearls at their throats, past the window I had sealed twice during storms, past the closed door of Charles's old room. The music from the foyer faded behind us until all I could hear was the soft click of my heels and the rain brushing the glass. Nathan opened the library door and stepped aside. I knew before I entered that he had planned this. The desk lamp was on. The curtains were drawn. A cream envelope sat in the center of Charles's old mahogany desk, exactly where my father-in-law used to leave medical bills for me to organize. Beside it lay a black pen, and a check folded once. My stomach went still. Not empty. Not afraid. Still. Nathan closed the door. This has gone too far, he said. I turned to him slowly. Your mother humiliating me in front of 70 guests. You making a scene, he said. His voice was low, polished, practiced. It sounded like Margaret had helped him choose the words. I looked at the envelope again. My name was typed across the front. Emily Carter Hawthorne. Not Mrs. Nathan Hawthorne. Not dear. Not even Emily. Just the name they wanted removed from their life with as little noise as possible. Nathan walked to the desk and touched the envelope with 2 fingers. I did not want to do this tonight. Then why is it already here? He looked away. That answer was enough. I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. Divorce agreement. Confidentiality clause. Temporary relocation allowance. A small settlement that would have covered 6 months of rent in a modest apartment outside the city if I lived carefully and never got sick. They had calculated my exit like a catering expense. Neat. Necessary. Disposable. My eyes moved across the pages. I saw Nathan's signature near the bottom, clean and confident. I saw a blank line waiting for mine. I saw that the agreement referred to Hawthorne Manor as marital family property under Margaret's control. For the first time that evening, I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was careless. Your mother helped prepare this, I said. Nathan crossed his arms. She asked the attorney to make it fair. Which attorney? Not Whitaker, he said quickly. A different firm. One that understands discretion. Of course. They had avoided the only lawyer who knew the truth. I set the papers down and rested my fingertips on the edge of the desk. Charles had died in that room. He had trusted me in that room. Now his son was trying to erase me in that same room without even reading the one document that mattered. Nathan softened his voice, and that almost hurt more. Emily, take the money. Leave before this becomes uglier. You do not fit here, and tonight proved that. I looked at the wedding ring on my hand. The diamond caught the lamplight, small and cold. I remembered him sliding it onto my finger outside a courthouse because we had wanted something simple. I remembered believing simple meant honest. Did you read every page before you signed? I asked. His brow tightened. My attorney did. That was not my question. He exhaled, impatient now. Yes, Emily. I know what it says. I touched the line where my signature was supposed to go. Did your mother read it before you gave it to me? Yes. Madison. His face changed. Just slightly. Enough. This is not about Madison. It became about Madison when you let her stand beside you while your mother moved me beside the refreshment table. He had no answer. The rain grew louder against the windows, or maybe the room had become quieter. I folded the divorce papers once and placed them back on the desk without signing. Then I reached into the pocket of my old dress and closed my hand around the small brass key Charles had given me with the sealed envelope. Nathan noticed the movement. What is that? He asked. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and felt the last soft part of my marriage settle into silence. You should have read the deed, I said. For a moment, Nathan only stared at me as if I had spoken in a language he had never bothered to learn. What deed? He asked. I did not answer right away. Some truths deserved silence before they entered a room. I looked at the shelves behind him, at Charles's old leather books, at the framed photograph of Hawthorne Manor taken sometime in the 1960s when the driveway was still gravel and the maple trees were half their size. People loved to call that house a legacy. They loved the word because it sounded noble, heavy, untouchable. But legacy did not pay overdue loans. Legacy did not repair leaking roofs. Legacy did not stop a bank from placing a red notice on a family door. 2 years earlier, I had found Charles sitting alone at this same desk with his reading glasses in one hand and a stack of unpaid notices spread before him. His oxygen machine hummed softly beside the window. Outside, late October leaves scraped across the terrace. He looked smaller that day, not because of sickness, but because shame had folded him inward. Margaret cannot know you saw those, he said. I asked him if the house was really in danger. He closed his eyes. That was answer enough. The Hawthorne Company had been losing money for years under Nathan's management, but Margaret kept hosting dinners as if silver trays could hide debt. They had refinanced the house, delayed payments, borrowed against land, and smiled through every warning. Charles had been too ill to stop it. Nathan had been too proud to admit it. Margaret had been too busy protecting the family image to protect the family itself. I remembered sitting across from Charles while he told me the bank would begin foreclosure within 60 days if the arrears were not cleared. 60 days. That was all the time standing between Hawthorne Manor and a public auction sign on the front lawn. I had thought of my mother then. Her little brick house in Ohio. The porch steps she painted every summer. The kitchen window where she grew basil in chipped blue cups. She had left it to me with a note that said, "So you will always have somewhere to go." I sold it in 3 weeks. The buyers paid in cash. I signed the closing documents in a county office that smelled like toner, old carpet, and burnt coffee. I told the woman behind the desk that I had no questions because if I asked even one, I might have cried in front of a stranger. The money cleared on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the bank had received enough to stop the foreclosure and release the immediate claim against the estate. Nathan never knew. Margaret never knew. I let them believe a private restructuring had saved them because Charles begged me to protect his son from public shame. That was my mistake. Love makes excuses. Dignity pays quietly. And people who benefit from silence often mistake it for emptiness. After the payment, Charles called Thomas Whitaker to the manor. I sat in the corner of this library while the attorney opened his briefcase and spread the documents on the desk. Charles's voice was weak, but his decision was not. She saved this house, he said. So this house will protect her when I cannot. The transfer was not a gift born from impulse. It was a legal repayment secured through the estate, recorded through the county, witnessed properly, and held until every challenge period passed. Charles insisted the deed be placed in my name alone, with clear language preventing Margaret, Nathan, or any family officer from selling, mortgaging, or removing me without my written consent. I had argued with him. I said it would destroy the family if they found out. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Emily, they are already destroying what you keep saving." Back in the library, Nathan's face had gone pale under the warm desk lamp. He looked from the unsigned divorce papers to the brass key in my hand. "You are bluffing," he said, but his voice did not believe itself. My phone vibrated inside my purse before I could answer. The screen lit up with the name he had avoided all evening. Thomas Whitaker. I let it ring once, twice. Then I picked it up and said, "Yes, Mr. Whitaker. It is time." Nathan watched me end the call as if the small black phone in my hand had become something dangerous. "What did you do?" he asked. I placed it back inside my purse and looked at the unsigned papers on the desk. I answered a call. "From Whitaker." "Yes." His mouth tightened. For the first time that night, he looked less embarrassed by me and more afraid of what I knew. But fear is an uncomfortable feeling for people who have spent their lives mistaking comfort for power. Nathan picked up the divorce papers and slid them back into the envelope with quick, uneven movements. "You are trying to scare me," he said. "It will not work. Whatever my father told you, whatever you think you have, this is still my family's house." I looked around the library. Charles's books, Charles's desk, the chair where I had slept upright on nights when his fever rose and the nurse could not come until morning. Nathan had inherited the name. I had inherited the truth. There was a difference. "Then you should have nothing to worry about," I said. That made him angry in a way my tears never had. He wanted me frightened. He wanted me grateful for the small check on the desk. He wanted me to leave quietly so the guests could finish dessert, without seeing the crack in the hawthorn walls. Instead, I turned toward the door. He stepped after me. "Emily, do not walk back in there and embarrass yourself." I stopped with my hand on the brass knob. I am not the one who should be worried about embarrassment. Then I opened the door and returned to the sound of applause. In the foyer, Margaret had gathered everyone beneath the chandelier again. A waiter passed with glasses of sparkling cider and champagne. The photographer stood near the fireplace, ready to capture the family as if nothing ugly had happened. Madison had moved even closer to Margaret, her white gown glowing under the warm lights, her smile fixed and perfect. When she saw Nathan come in behind me, her expression softened with quiet victory. She thought the envelope had done its work. They all did. Margaret lifted her glass. "Before we begin the live auction," she announced, "Nathan and I would like to share a special family decision. Hawthorne Manor has always stood for grace, generosity, and responsible stewardship." I almost laughed at that last phrase. Responsible stewardship had not kept the roof from leaking. It had not paid the overdue tax notices. It had not saved the East Garden from being quietly listed as development land. "As many of you know," Margaret continued, "the East acreage has become difficult to maintain. After thoughtful discussion, we have decided to move forward with a private sale that will allow the Hawthorne name to expand into new charitable work." The guests nodded as if selling land was noble when rich people used the right words. I saw Judge Wallace look sharply at her. He knew Charles had loved that garden. He had planted the first row of dogwoods there for Nathan's grandmother. Margaret smiled brighter. "Madison Blake has kindly agreed to assist Nathan with the donor transition and public announcement. Her family has deep experience in preservation partnerships." Madison lowered her head as if humbled, but her fingers rested lightly on Nathan's arm. Cameras clicked. Nathan did not move away. A thin, cold line settled inside me. Not jealousy. Clarity. Margaret was not only pushing me out. She was placing Madison where she thought a proper wife belonged. Beside Nathan. Beside the money. Beside the house she had no right to sell. I stood near the bottom of the staircase, the old navy dress brushing my knees, the brass key warm in my pocket from the heat of my hand. People glanced at me, then away. In their minds, I was already gone. The embarrassing wife had been corrected. The paperwork had been delivered. The future had been arranged without me. Margaret raised her glass higher. "To the future of Hawthorne Manor," she said. "To family, legacy, and the home that will always belong to us." Nathan joined the toast. Madison smiled at the cameras. The guests lifted their glasses because that was what guests did when power told them where to look. Then the front doorbell rang. One clear sound cut through the applause and crossed the marble foyer like a verdict. Margaret's smile froze. I did not turn around at first. I only watched her face as the butler opened the door behind me. Rain whispered in from the night. A man's calm voice entered with it. "Good evening. I am Thomas Whitaker, attorney for the late Charles Hawthorne." Thomas Whitaker stepped into Hawthorne Manor with Rain on the shoulders of his dark overcoat and a leather briefcase in his left hand. He was not a tall man, and he did not enter like someone looking for attention. He entered like someone who had never needed it. The room changed anyway. Conversations thinned. Glasses lowered. Even the quartet near the dining room doors let the last note fade too early. Margaret stared at him from beneath the chandelier, her smile still on her face, but no longer attached to anything real. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "this is a private event." He removed his gloves slowly. "I apologize for the interruption, Mrs. Hawthorne." His voice was calm enough to make everyone else sound nervous. "But the matter is time-sensitive." Nathan moved first, crossing the foyer with the kind of forced confidence he used in board meetings when numbers had already turned against him. "Why are you here?" he asked. "My father's estate was settled months ago." "Most of it was," Mr. Whitaker said. Nathan's face tightened. "Margaret heard the same thing I did." "Most." Such a small word. Such a dangerous one. Madison stepped back half an inch from Nathan, her hand slipping from his arm as if she had only just remembered people were watching. I remained near the staircase, the old navy dress still damp at the hem, my purse held in front of me with both hands. I did not want to look powerful. I wanted to look exactly as I was. Tired. Quiet. Done being mistaken for harmless. Margaret gave a short laugh. "Whatever document you brought can wait until Monday. We have donors here, judges, board members, friends of the family." "That is why I came tonight," Mr. Whitaker replied. He looked past her then. Not at Nathan. Not at Madison. Not at the guests who suddenly wished they were somewhere else. His eyes found mine. "Mrs. Hawthorne, should I proceed?" The silence that followed was different from every silence I had survived in that house. It was not the silence after an insult, where people waited to see if I would break. It was not Nathan's silence, smooth and cowardly. This one had weight. It made the marble foyer feel like a courtroom. Margaret blinked. "Why are you asking her?" Mr. Whitaker did not answer her. He waited for me. I could feel every stare turn toward the dress they had mocked less than an hour earlier. I thought of my mother's house in Ohio, the maple tree, the empty rooms after I sold it. I thought of Charles's shaking hands pressing the envelope into mine. I thought of Nathan's voice in the library telling me to take the money and leave before things became uglier. My fingers loosened around my purse. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker," I said. "Please proceed." Margaret's expression hardened instantly. "Emily, this is absurd." I looked at her, and for the first time, I did not feel like a guest asking permission to breathe. "No," I said softly. "This is overdue." Mr. Whitaker walked to the center table where Margaret had arranged silver donation cards and white roses. He placed his briefcase beside them. The brass latches clicked open, and that small sound moved through the room sharper than any raised voice could have. He took out a folder stamped with the county recorder's seal, a second folder from the estate office, and a notarized letter bearing Charles Hawthorne's signature. Judge Wallace stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with recognition. Nathan swallowed. Madison's perfect smile had disappeared completely. Margaret lifted her chin. "I will not have my husband's memory used for theatrics." For the first time that night, Mr. Whitaker looked directly at her. "Neither will I." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Margaret went still. Mr. Whitaker opened the first folder and rested one hand on the page. "For clarity, I will state only what is legally documented and recorded. No family interpretation. No assumption. No social preference." He looked at me once more. "Mrs. Hawthorne has authorized disclosure in the presence of all parties currently attempting to discuss the sale of Hawthorne Manor property." A low murmur moved through the guests. Nathan turned toward me slowly. "Emily," he said, but my name sounded different now. Less like a warning, more like a question he was afraid to finish. Mr. Whitaker lifted the top page from the folder. "This concerns the ownership, transfer restrictions, and protected deed status of Hawthorne Manor." The room held its breath, and for the first time since I had walked into that gala, nobody was laughing. Mr. Whitaker did not rush. That was what made it worse for them. He did not shout over Margaret. He did not accuse Nathan. He did not look at Madison long enough to give her a place in the story. He simply adjusted his glasses, laid the first page flat on the rose-covered table, and began reading in a voice so steady that every whispered excuse in the room died before it could reach the air. On March 12th, 2 years ago, Hawthorne Manor entered a 60-day pre-foreclosure period after repeated missed payments tied to private refinancing agreements. A murmur moved through the guests like wind under a door. Margaret's face tightened, but she kept her chin high. "That was a temporary accounting issue," she said. Mr. Whitaker turned one page. "It was not temporary. It was resolved through a private payment made on April 3rd by Emily Carter Hawthorne. Nathan looked at me then, really looked at me. Not at the dress, not at the wet hem, not at the woman he had planned to send away with a small check and a confidentiality clause. He looked at my face as if he was seeing a stranger standing in his family home. "That is not possible," Margaret said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and several people heard it. I kept my hands folded in front of me. My fingers were cold, but they did not shake. Mr. Whitaker continued. The payment satisfied the immediate arrears, halted foreclosure proceedings, and preserved the estate from public auction. The source of funds was documented as proceeds from the sale of property previously owned by Mrs. Hawthorne in Ohio. Judge Wallace lowered his eyes. I knew he understood before the others did. He had known my mother. He had once told me Charles respected quiet people because they carried the heaviest truths without applause. Nathan took one step toward me. "You sold your mother's house?" His voice was soft now, almost wounded, as if my sacrifice had betrayed him by existing without his permission. I did not answer. The room was not ready for my voice yet. It needed to hear the papers first. Margaret lifted a hand toward the guests, trying to gather the room back into her control. Charles would never have allowed this to be discussed publicly. Mr. Whitaker looked down at the notarized letter. Charles specifically instructed that disclosure occur if any party attempted to remove Mrs. Hawthorne from the property, force a settlement based on false ownership claims, or sell protected land without her consent. Madison went very still. Her eyes moved toward the donation cards, then to Nathan, then away from him. It was a small movement, but I saw it. People like Madison knew how to stand near power. They also knew when to step away from it. Nathan whispered, "Emily, why did you not tell me?" I almost turned to him. Almost. Then I remembered every dinner where his silence had sat beside me like another guest. I remembered the library, the envelope, the way he had said I did not fit there. Some questions did not deserve the comfort of an answer. Mr. Whitaker opened the second folder. Following that payment, Mr. Charles Hawthorne executed a legally binding transfer agreement as repayment and protection. The agreement was reviewed by estate counsel, recorded with the county, and held under standard challenge period requirements before final confirmation. Margaret's hand tightened around her glass until the ice inside clicked. "Protection from whom?" she asked. Mr. Whitaker paused. For the first time, his calmness felt almost merciful. "From anyone who treated the house as an image while Mrs. Hawthorne treated it as a responsibility." The room went silent enough for me to hear rain tapping the high windows above the staircase. That sound had followed me all evening. It had been there when they laughed at my dress. It had been there when Nathan led me to the divorce papers. It was there now, patient as truth. Mr. Whitaker placed the final document on the table and turned it so the county seal faced the room. Therefore, any proposed sale of the East Acreage, any removal of Mrs. Hawthorne from the residence, and any divorce settlement representing Hawthorne Manor as property controlled by Margaret or Nathan Hawthorne is legally inaccurate. Nathan's face lost the last of its color. Margaret opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Madison looked at the chandelier, as if she wished light itself could hide her. Mr. Whitaker rested 2 fingers on the deed and spoke the sentence that changed the house forever. "The legal owner of Hawthorne Manor is Emily Carter Hawthorne." For several seconds, nobody moved. The sentence seemed to hang beneath the chandelier, bright and impossible, touching every polished surface in the foyer before settling into the marble floor. "The legal owner of Hawthorne Manor is Emily Carter Hawthorne." I heard my full name in Mr. Whitaker's voice, and for the first time in 3 years, it did not sound borrowed. It did not sound like something attached to Nathan, tolerated by Margaret, or whispered with pity by women in pearl earrings. It sounded recorded, protected, true. Margaret was the first to recover enough to speak. "No," she said, but the word came out thin. Charles was ill. He was grieving. He could not have understood what he signed. Mr. Whitaker opened the notarized letter and turned it so Judge Wallace could see the signature. Mr. Hawthorne was examined by his physician the morning of execution. His capacity was confirmed in writing. 2 witnesses were present. The transfer was recorded with the county on May 2nd. The challenge period expired without objection because none of you knew the transfer existed. Every sentence took something from her. Not money, not furniture, control. Margaret looked at Nathan as if he could fix it, But Nathan was staring at the deed like it had become a mirror. "Dad gave her the house?" he whispered. "No," Mr. Whitaker said. "Your father repaid the woman who saved it." That was the moment the room truly changed. Until then, they had been shocked by ownership. Now they understood sacrifice. I saw it move from face to face. The guest who had laughed at my dress now looked at the floor. The photographer lowered his camera. Judge Wallace removed his glasses and pressed them gently against his palm. Madison stepped away from Nathan so quietly that only a few people noticed. I noticed. Nathan noticed too. His eyes flicked toward her, and something painful crossed his face. Maybe he finally understood that the world he had chosen was built on the same shallow respect he had given me. Margaret gripped the back of a chair. "Emily," she said, using my name like a key she had just discovered might open something. "There must have been a misunderstanding." I looked at her across the roses and silver donation cards. Less than an hour earlier, she had placed me beside the refreshment table because she thought I ruined the picture. Now she was standing in my house asking the room to forget what it had heard. "There was no misunderstanding," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "You understood exactly what you were doing when you mocked my dress. You understood exactly what you were doing when you prepared divorce papers behind my back. You understood exactly what you were doing when you announced the sale of land that was never yours to sell." Nathan flinched. Margaret's lips parted, but I did not let her rescue herself. With another polished sentence, "The only thing you misunderstood was my silence." The foyer went still again. I reached into the pocket of my old navy dress and took out the brass key Charles had given me. I placed it beside the deed. The small sound of metal touching paper felt louder than the applause had been. "This house was not protected by your name," I said. "It was protected by truth, by sacrifice, and by a man who finally saw what his family refused to see." Nathan walked toward me slowly. "Emily, I did not know. I believed that. I also knew it was not enough." "You did not ask," I said. His eyes filled with regret, too late to be useful. Madison looked toward the front door, her white gown no longer glowing with victory, but standing out like a mistake under the chandelier. Margaret's face had gone pale, but I did not feel proud of her humiliation. I felt tired. Tired of being small so other people could feel tall. Tired of turning pain into politeness. Tired of protecting a family that had used my silence as a place to hide their shame. Mr. Whitaker lifted the final page. "For the record," he said, "Mrs. Hawthorne has full authority to approve or deny any sale, occupancy agreement, estate access, or use of Hawthorne Manor going forward." The room listened because now the truth had witnesses. I looked at Nathan, then at Margaret, then at Madison. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I do not belong beside people who only respect ownership." Outside, the rain softened against the windows. Inside, nobody laughed. The house they had used to judge me had finally spoken in my name. Nathan reached for me as if regret had given him permission to touch what loyalty had failed to protect. I stepped back before his hand found mine. The movement was small, but everyone saw it. His fingers closed around empty air, and for the first time that night, he looked less like a Hawthorne heir and more like a man who had finally arrived too late. "Emily," he said, his voice uneven now. "Please. I did not know about the house. I did not know what you gave up." I looked at him standing beneath the chandelier. The same man who had asked me not to embarrass him. The same man who had signed divorce papers before looking me in the eye. "You knew how they treated me," I said. That was enough. His face tightened as if my quiet answer had hurt more than shouting would have. Maybe it did. Shouting gives people something to fight. Calm truth gives them nowhere to hide. Margaret moved toward the table with slow, careful steps. Her pearls trembled at her throat. "Emily, whatever was said tonight, emotions were high. I never meant for you to feel unwelcome." A sound almost left me then. Not a laugh. Something sadder. She had not meant for me to feel unwelcome. She had only asked me to stand near the refreshments. She had only let guests laugh at my dress. She had only helped prepare papers to remove me from the house I had saved. People like Margaret did not call cruelty by its name. They wrapped it in manners and expected the wounded person to be grateful for the ribbon. "You meant every word," I said. "The only thing that changed is who heard the truth afterward." Judge Wallace looked down. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. The room that had laughed so easily now seemed unable to breathe. Madison set her glass on a side table, but her hand missed the coaster. The faint click made her flinch. Nathan turned to her, perhaps expecting comfort, perhaps expecting the future his mother had promised him. Madison did not move closer. She smoothed the front of her white gown and said nothing at all. That silence told him more than I ever could. She had wanted the name, the house, the photograph beside him under the chandelier. Without those things, she had no reason to stand in the storm he had made. Margaret saw it too. Her eyes sharpened with panic. "Nathan," she whispered, but Nathan was still looking at me. "We can fix this," he said. "I will speak to my attorney. We can tear up the agreement. We can start over." I glanced at the cream envelope he had carried back from the library. It rested in his hand like evidence of the man he had chosen to be before he knew I had power. "You want to start over because you discovered what I own," I said. "Not because you remembered who I was." His eyes filled, and I believe the regret was real. That was the cruelest part. Real regret does not erase real choices. Margaret clasped her hands together, her voice softer now, smaller. "This is still our family home." I looked around the foyer. The staircase I had climbed with clean blankets at midnight. The window I had sealed in the rain. The library where Charles had trusted me with the truth. "No," I said. "It was your family image. It became my responsibility." Mr. Whitaker closed the folder with quiet finality. The sound ended the argument before anyone else could begin one. Nathan looked at me as if he was waiting for one last opening, one small place where my heart might still be trained to rescue him. I had rescued enough. If the deed had not been in my name, I asked him, "Would you still be sorry?" He opened his mouth. No answer came. That silence was honest. At last honest. I nodded once, not because I was satisfied, but because I finally had the truth I needed. Outside, the rain slowed against the glass. Inside, the people who had mistaken my patience for poverty stood surrounded by everything I had saved, and none of them knew where to put their shame. I did not make them leave that night. That would have been easy, and easy cruelty was the language they understood too well. I would not become fluent in it for their comfort. Instead, I turned to Mr. Whitaker and asked him to prepare a formal occupancy notice with the correct legal timeline. 30 days. No shouting. No public scene beyond the truth they had earned. Margaret stared at me as if mercy from me offended her more than anger would have. "You are giving me notice to leave my own home?" she asked. Her voice shook around the word own. I looked at the deed still resting on the table between us. "No," I said. "I am giving you 30 days to leave mine." The sentence landed softly, but it changed everything. Nathan closed his eyes. Madison looked toward the front door again, and this time she moved. She gathered her wrap from a chair and told Margaret she had an early flight in the morning. No one believed her. No one stopped her. She crossed the marble foyer carefully, trying not to hurry, trying not to look like a woman. Escaping a future that had lost its shine. When the door closed behind her, Nathan finally understood the cost of choosing people who only stood beside him when the lights were flattering. I did not feel victorious watching her go. I felt tired in a place too deep for sleep to reach. Mr. Whitaker asked if I wanted the guests escorted out. I looked around the room at the donors, the board members, the neighbors, the women who had smiled into their glasses while Margaret cut me down. Some looked ashamed. Some looked curious. Some looked disappointed that a private humiliation had become a legal lesson. "The charity auction can continue," I said. Margaret blinked. Nathan looked confused. "Charles built that foundation for children, not for Hawthorne pride. The donations should still go where they were promised." Judge Wallace gave me a small nod from near the fireplace, and that quiet respect steadied me more than applause would have. I asked the quartet to continue. I asked the staff to serve dinner. I asked Mr. Whitaker to collect the false divorce agreement and send it to my attorney in the morning. Then I walked back into the library, the same room where Nathan had tried to purchase my silence, and placed my wedding ring on Charles's desk. Nathan followed me, but this time he stopped at the doorway like a guest waiting for permission. "Emily," he said, "please do not decide everything tonight." I looked at the ring. It seemed smaller than I remembered. "I decided slowly," I said. "You just noticed tonight." He stepped into the room, his face pale, his tuxedo no longer making him look powerful. "I can change." I wanted that sentence to matter. A part of me, the part that had once loved him in grocery store parking lots and winter storms, wanted to reach for the memory of who he had been before the mansion swallowed his spine. But memories are not vows. Regret is not repair. And love without courage becomes another room where a woman is left standing alone. Maybe you can, I said, but not with me paying the price while you learn. His eyes lowered. I picked up the corrected divorce papers Mr. Whitaker had drafted from his briefcase and signed only the acknowledgement allowing my counsel to proceed. My hand did not tremble. The pen scratched across the page with a sound that felt like a lock opening. Nathan watched the ink dry. I lost you tonight, he whispered. I shook my head. No, you lost me every time you stayed silent. When I walked back to the foyer, the chandeliers still glittered, the roses still perfumed the air, and my old navy dress still carried the faint scent of rain. But the house felt different under my feet. Not because it was mine. Because for the first time, I was no longer asking anyone inside it to let me belong. 30 days later, Margaret left Hawthorne Manor through the front door without rain, without guests, without anyone watching except the moving crew and me. She wore a gray coat, dark sunglasses, and the same pearl necklace she had touched the night she thought my shame would be entertainment. She did not apologize. I did not ask her to. Some people would rather lose a house than surrender the story they told themselves to feel superior. Nathan came that afternoon for the last of his things. He looked thinner, quieter, no longer polished by certainty. He paused in the foyer where Mr. Whitaker had placed the deed on the table, where the laughter had died, where my name had finally become louder than theirs. I keep replaying it, he said. Everything I should have said. I watched a mover carry a box of framed family photographs past us. Charles's portrait remained on the wall. That had been my choice. The house still deserved to remember the one Hawthorne who had understood gratitude before pride. The hard part is not knowing what you should have said, I told Nathan. It is becoming the kind of person who says it when it costs you something. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, and for once, he did not ask me to comfort him. That was the closest thing to respect he had given me in years. When the door closed behind him, the sound did not break me. It cleared the air. I spent the next month changing small things first. I fixed the West Hall window properly. I paid every staff member a bonus with a handwritten note. I opened Charles's library to the foundation. Board and turned the East Garden into a protected children's reading space instead of a development sale. I kept my mother's old dress hanging on the outside of my closet door, not because I needed to remember their cruelty, but because I needed to remember my own restraint. One evening in late spring, I hosted the foundation dinner again. Not as Nathan's wife. Not as Margaret's embarrassment. As myself. The chandelier glowed above the foyer, but this time the light felt softer. The roses were pale yellow instead of white. The quartet played near the staircase. Judge Wallace arrived early and brought a small framed photograph of Charles planting the first dogwood tree in the East Garden. He would have been proud, he said. I believed him. That night, I wore the navy dress again. The hem had been repaired by a proper tailor, and I added my mother's small pearl earrings, the only jewelry of hers I had never been able to sell. When I walked down the staircase, the room became quiet, but not with judgment. People stood straighter. Some smiled. Some looked away, embarrassed by the memory of who they had been when they thought I was powerless. I did not need them to suffer. I did not need them to beg. I only needed to stop shrinking to make their comfort easier. Near the end of the dinner, I stepped onto the terrace alone. The East Garden stretched beneath the evening sky, green and safe, the dogwood blossoms pale against the dark lawn. For years, I had thought belonging meant being welcomed by people who held the keys. I was wrong. Belonging began the night I stopped asking permission to stand inside a life I had already earned. They mocked the dress because they thought it proved I was poor. But that night, the truth proved something else. I was never poor in the ways that mattered, and my silence had never been weakness. It had only been dignity waiting for the right moment to speak.